Welcome to Top Bracket Podcast, where top performers share the strategies behind real success.
Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Christopher Hicks. How would you describe yourself, actually? I don't want to just put you in a bucket of technology.
I definitely think that I'm a very technology first sort of person. I've spent my entire life trying to mold technology to help people's lives function better. And so yeah, that's definitely a big part of my life.
Most excellent. Okay. So I want to start at the foundation, Chris, because someone who stays relevant across multiple eras of technology, that usually comes from deep experience, not just technical skills. When you look back across your career, what experience most shaped the way you think about systems, reliability, and leadership today?
Um, my early part of my career, I was a consultant, and so I worked for a lot of different organizations, and I wasn't sure that full-time employment even made sense for me. But Yahoo reached out to me 15 years ago to work on their search product. So they had a production engineering team that had a very small number of people managing around 100,000 servers that we had spread out worldwide. And so it was amazing to me to see how fabulous it was to have a group of people working together to be able to build something that large and that efficient. And so, definitely all of my work time since then, I look back at what that group of folks did at Yahoo that really was extremely efficient and effective. The experience of managing that many things, I think, to a lot of people would be very overwhelming and scary. So being able to establish what appropriate guardrails are and give people tools that work well as having the observability piece so that people can see whether what they're doing or not is breaking anything. I think that gives you the ability to do amazing things.
Wow, that's one hell of a perspective to have. So when you were at Yahoo, they only had, let me know if I heard you incorrectly. They only had 100 servers?
No, we were we were part of the search team. Years ago, Inktomi was a separate search product company that got
Mhm.
purchased by Yahoo. And
Okay.
so we had a team of 12 people and we were responsible for 100,000 servers. And
100,000. Okay, that makes more sense.
and so 40,000 servers were a massive Hadoop cluster. Yahoo was very big at pushing Hadoop to the limits. And so that Hadoop cluster was going and crawling the internet and producing indexes that were used by the other 60,000 servers to be able to respond to queries when people were trying to look for things. And part of my responsibility was being the release to production coordinator. And so we had 2 windows every week, and we would get like 30 developers together in a conference room and decide what was going to go into that next release. And my responsibility was making sure that all of those updates made it to all of the servers so that we could 3 days later start the process over again. So like twice a week, we were doing releases, and it was great that they were scientific about it. You wanted to make sure that you didn't have too many independent variables when you were trying to see whether your changes were going to make a difference or not. And you had certain groups of people that were pulling in the direction of trying to make things more efficient. How can we use less memory to be able to accomplish the same thing? And you had other people that were like, I'm going to use whatever memory I've got available so that I can push quality as far as possible. And so you didn't want changes for efficiency going in at the same time as changes for quality, because
Mm.
neither side would be able to see whether their changes were really having the desired effect. And so actually, being scientific and saying, no, we can't change multiple things at once and really be able to read anything out of the metrics and meaningfully discern anything from it, was a level of, responsibility and recognition that I think a lot of people would be great to get to there.
Okay. And for those who aren't highly technical, can you explain us what a Hadoop cluster is?
Absolutely. Hadoop is a way to be able to get a lot of servers working on the same thing at the same time. Google had this idea called MapReduce, which is a way to be able to split large problems into smaller problems and then be able to merge that back together to be able to get your final answer.
Oh, wow.
So Hadoop was one of the earliest technologies for applying MapReduce and being able to tie a lot of things together. When I was at OpenX, we were using Hadoop clusters for doing all of the analytics for any of the ads that were being served. And so, every time somebody sees an ad, you need to, you know, total all that up, figure out who should get billed, how many people saw what, and that sort of thing. And so Hadoop allowed you to be able to use commodity machines to be able to solve these problems that were, really bigger than you could solve on a single computer.
Wow. Okay. So my understanding of this is you take a big problem, you break it down into smaller individual components, solve each individual component, then restructure it again that solves the larger problem.
Right.
Okay.
But that's what the MapReduce algorithm lets you do is it lets you split it up and then knit it back together so that you've got an answer that is accurate across the whole thing.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Efficient.
I have been following the SpaceX stuff, and what they're doing from an engineering perspective is truly inspiring. I mean, it's sort of sad that Boeing is having such a hard time keeping up with their traditional methods, whereas
Hmm.
SpaceX is functioning much more like a tech company. MapReduce is more limited in the sense that you're really just dealing with like one set of data. Imagine a spreadsheet that wouldn't fit on your computer, but you still want to be able to get the total for it. The spreadsheet has all of the same data in there,
Yeah.
whereas the stuff that Elon is doing is more like looking at things beyond a single problem. A given MapReduce action would always pretty much be on the same sort of plane. It's just solving that one dimension. But as a business, you should look at, oh, is putting all of this compute and storage into calculating this helping my business, or is it, am I just wasting my time? And so that's the sort of stuff that Elon's looking at for like, how can we, skip steps that made sense 10 years ago that still just don't make sense.
I see. Okay. It's a lot more advanced. So you've been in technology for what, 40 years? You've worked across decades of change in tech. And
Absolutely.
that kind of longevity usually changes the way you define excellence. How's your view of what great infrastructure and operational leadership, what does that look like and how has that changed over the years for you?
Fundamentally, philosophically, I'm still very much of the belief that we should do everything we can to make the computer do the work for us, and whatever we can to get the humans out of it. But the opportunities for that and the ease of that, has changed radically in my lifetime. We were very happy. 20 years ago to, have Oracle forms that filled in information for people. And, we would spend months getting those systems built so that we could hand them off to people. And in the infrastructure space, we've seen a lot of folks really coming out with some nice products for, various niches of things. There's lots of different observability tools, Grafana and Ground Cover, are two of the more impressive outfits that I've seen recently for having a nice suite of tools that work well together to be able to let people feed in their various forms of data and be able to analyze it and understand it and work with it effectively. And the quality of the automation tools that we have has evolved considerably. When I was starting off, we were literally programming in C and that sort of thing. And I can still remember sitting on my parents' couch reading C books that I had grabbed from Walden Books. And I, built a career from there. But all of that stuff is what we call procedural programming. You're telling the computer to do this, then this, then this, and you have to know the right sequence of things and what your data structure should be and that sort of thing. But in more recent years, we've gone from, semi procedural tools like Ansible, which is a way for being able to automate a lot of server type things that people still pretty actively use. But now we have tools
Yeah.
like Terraform, where instead of thinking about the problem sequentially, you're more worrying about defining what the end state should be. You're like, these are the, I want to build this server and I want to attach it to this database and I want it to have this network. And so you describe all of that in Terraform's language and then you just say, go build it. And it figures out that, oh, I guess I need to make the network before I like attach a computer to it. So let me go see if I can build the network and that sort of thing. And so that really takes a lot of the cognitive load off of the people that are doing the work so that they can focus on the broader picture and and what the end goals are. And so we're able to be much more efficient and go much further for the same amount of time for the engineering effort. And then in recent years, it's been truly amazing to see how far AI has advanced. So we've been able to use the AI tools to do a lot of programming stuff, even though we use Terraform to build a lot of the infrastructure, we still need to write code in Golang and various other programming languages to be able to automate various pieces and to get things to work smoothly. And so it's much more has become something where on the procedural code, you can just tell it what you want the end result to be, and the more clearly you define that, the more likely the AI is to land on the target when it's done. And, it's almost a fire and forget sort of thing, but you don't really want to treat it that way. You want to look at what the results are. And so one of the things that has been very helpful is the phrase trust but verify. I believe that it's gonna do the right thing, but having a verification step that's effective and meaningful is just as important for checking your own work and making sure that you didn't make a mistake as it is for checking the AI results. And so a lot of people are not naturally good at figuring out what an effective verification step is. And, hopefully people come into code review and help educate people on ways to make sure that what they're doing is leading to the results that they want. In the age of AI, it's also something where that cycle is accelerated. So if you eliminate the time that you were putting into coding things, then you're coding stuff faster, but it means now you're putting more time into the human review of what that code is. And that's not what people had the best practice at doing. And so that's something where
Yeah.
people are having to improve their skills in code review and figure out, like I said, what those meaningful verification steps are so that you can be confident that what you're putting out there isn't going to blow stuff up. And there have been plenty of examples where people are like, "Oh, I thought this was good and it got reviewed and it got laid out in production and oops, we took down the website." And so, that stuff is making it into the New York Times on a weekly basis these days. And so, yeah, there's lots of people that need to skill up on the verification side.
Yeah, that's real bad for brand equity. A lot of people hear the word observability, but far fewer understand what it actually means. And when the stakes are real, like you just said, how do you define observability, and why does it matter so much in modern technological organizations?
You
So
know,
I guess I got a little bit more on that.
Sure.
Where do you think teams most often confuse visibility with true operational understanding?
It's easy to imagine that your dashboard, is telling you what you need it to know and that your alerts are going to warn you when things go south. There's always, as Rumsfeld said so many years ago, the unknown unknowns. What are the things that we didn't think about? So having end-to-end tests so that you have a very complete view of whether things are being successful or not is a nice thing to have. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to anticipate everything. And so being ready to say, okay, a production incident, there was this problem, our alerts didn't fire, the customer started complaining, and that's how he figured out what the problem is. That's an opportunity to figure out, well, what were the unknown unknowns that led in there? How can we build alerting so that we're warned about some of these things before the customers are aware of them next time? What things can we do in a pre-prod testing environment that could have potentially caught these things earlier?
Okay.
And so to answer your broader observability question, which does relate to everything we just said too, is that we're building incredibly complex things. And not everybody is going to know all of the different parts of the system. And so the observability tools give people an ability to look at what's going on inside of a complex system and relate different parts of the dynamics so that they can understand that if you change this variable, it's going to change this variable over here. And all of these things relate just like parts of your body. We don't understand everything that's going on in our body, but we can figure out what things we need to feel to figure out, okay, I need to eat now, I need to drink water, and that sort of thing. And that's, how people use these observability tools, is that through time they figure out which things really do matter and which things are more meaningful.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So that becomes especially important when the scale gets really serious and the margin for error gets very small. You help lead infrastructure efforts around Tubi's historic free Super Bowl event just last month. It's still technically March, so yeah, last month.
It was last year, actually. We
It
did
was
the
last
Super Bowl
year.
last year. Yes.
Okay. What did that experience reveal about preparation, pressure, and reliability at scale for you?
Several things, getting the entire organization focused on one thing means that
That's
people
hard.
and it rarely happens. It's just like you're waiting for the stars to align, and okay, yeah, yes, we achieved it, once every 12 years. But once you have everybody pulling in the same direction, then people aren't like, oh, I need to go work on this other thing. They're like, this is for the Super Bowl. Yes, let me see what I can do to get that done. And so all of the dev teams were independently working on making sure that their portion of things was reliable. And so they each did capacity planning for, okay, this is how much capacity we need to be able to handle what we expect from the Super Bowl. And then that lets, once you have the dev teams that can tell you, like, okay, this is what our needs are, then the infrastructure team can look and say, okay, we can add all that up, and that means we're going to need this much server capacity. And so we work with vendors like AWS and Datadog to say, okay, this is what we're expecting for this big event. Make sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row. And with people like AWS on the server side, we go ahead and we make sure that we've got all of those servers, up and running, and so that somebody else can't steal them at the last second and we run out of available capacity. So we pre-load all that capacity, so that's not something we're doing to respond to the traffic coming in, because particularly something like the Super Bowl, it's a big swing. You're going from nobody is watching this live stream to millions of people are watching this live stream, and then a couple of hours later it goes away again. And so typically you have dynamic capacity where you're going and you're adding more capacity as things are ramping up. But if you tried to do that for something like the Super Bowl, you would always be trying to catch up, and it would definitely give a bad user experience. And so when we can anticipate that and make sure, we built the road basically so that all the cars can go over it, then we ended up with a great experience. And various other people are streaming the Super Bowl. And as far as I know, that Tubi is the only company that has streamed the Super Bowl for free. And so we're definitely hoping that when Fox gets the Super Bowl again in a couple of years, that we'll get another chance to do that. And
Okay.
thought that was great that we were able to share it for everybody.
That is really cool. What do you so that one event created a lot of demand on the team because it was a super high traffic day, super high traffic window of time in a day. It wasn't even an entire day. Moments like that tend to expose whether a team is truly prepared or just hoping things hold together. In your experience, what are the earliest signs that a company's reliability practices are not keeping up with its growth and complexity?
If your failures are ending up in the New York Times, then you've exceeded your error budget.
One way to look at it. Is that what usually breaks first though? Is it communication, visibility, maybe ownership process, or nobody's really making the decision that needs to be made to pull everything together and push it forward?
Yeah, I mean, you can typically trace these things back to cultural aspects of the organization. And
Okay.
I've worked at lots of places where the reliability team, the infrastructure team are treated as, secondary. The dev teams are building the product, they're working with the product team, there's a lot of visibility and stuff that they have in the organization. And if that means that the leadership views that, okay, the reliability folks are just there to take whatever gets dumped over the wall and make it work, then you'll end up with, all sorts of things where the infrastructure team doesn't understand the implications of something that they were given to deploy, and it ends up being a mess. One of the things that Meta does very well, and this is something, an idea that's spread to a lot of other tech organizations, is having each dev team own their service. So my team as an infrastructure team becomes a platform that everybody else operates on, but each dev team is responsible for their own. If you deployed something bad, you need to roll it back. Don't expect me to come and do that for you. And so that sort of ownership culture means that the pain is being felt where it needs to be felt. If
Yeah.
all of the pain is felt by the infrastructure team, then the devs are just going to keep doing whatever silly things they're doing. But you tie that feedback loop so that they're having to solve those problems. And then it tends to motivate people to write things that are going to be reliable and that, provide good observability data so that it's easier for them to make sure that it's reliable.
Because they have to deal with the consequences of it not working themselves instead of getting passed off to someone else.
Yes. Yes, that really makes a huge difference. And that's not the traditional way that a lot of companies develop things. And so, it does take some, discipline from the top to enforce that. But the result is very nice. I mean, we crush the Super Bowl. We, do Liga MX games on a weekly basis that and doesn't really, cause any problems. And so, you just get in those habits and it just becomes natural.
What is the typical way or traditional way a company would roll out a development if it's not like that? That seems like the most practical way, the way you just explained it. So why aren't they doing it that way?
Um, it's hard to say. The most common answer I've given to this is that people haven't seen it done right. If you haven't seen it work well, and I was lucky to be at Yahoo and Uber and see amazing ways that people were able to accomplish things. If you've never experienced that, then you're going to not realize that that's an important thing to do and a necessary thing to do. A lot of people in leadership may have been in the same organization for 10 years. They don't have, the perspective of working for different places the way I do to be able to see, oh, that worked there. And oh, wow, these people were doing the old dumb thing and it didn't work over here. So to answer your initial question, it's very much more common to have developers focusing on development. And then as soon as they produce whatever the artifact from development is, that gets handed over to the infrastructure team. And the infrastructure team is responsible for deploying that and figuring out how much memory it needs, how many CPUs does it need, how many copies of it do we need, and that type of thing. Um,
Yeah.
and the infrastructure team can figure that out, but we don't have the hands-on knowledge of what's going on in the code to be able to make those decisions as effectively as we would like to. Getting the devs to make those same sort of decisions means that they're making it without the broader perspective on the infrastructure, but we can look at what's going on in the broad infrastructure sense and say, hey, you've allocated twice as much memory for your process as you're ever using. So why don't you tighten that up so that we can be more efficient and so we don't burn through so many servers? And the devs are like, oh, I didn't think about that. Cool. Let me go fix that now, you know? And so, but it's the fact that we're keeping it in their realm of responsibility means that when they do make changes and they're like, oh, we just added in this new algorithm into the code and it's going to use a lot more memory. They're like, okay, let me make sure that my processes have enough memory. And that doesn't need to involve me at all. They can totally self-service that and take care of that. And they're much closer to most of the stuff that's relevant to being able to make those decisions. And if we need to make a broader recommendation, we can come in and do that. And they learn from that pretty well.
Do you feel like the teams are pretty siloed then? It sounds like there is some type of cross-functional communication, but it sounds like it's very it's on a as needed basis.
Yeah, yeah. I've definitely would say that a certain amount of siloing is inevitable and probably healthy for the people involved. You can't think about everything that's going on in the organization all the time, or you wouldn't be able to get anything done. And so accepting that's just, human nature and life to a certain degree is okay. But there are obviously problems with people being isolated in silos. And so you need to have a way for people to be able to find who they're looking for on those rare occasions when they are actually looking for somebody that's in an adjacent silo. And so one of the things that I did within Tubi was I was working on a Kubernetes related project. And so I ended up having spreadsheets that ended up having the best picture of who owned what services in our infrastructure.
Okay.
And Datadog had a service catalog product. And I'm like, well, let me see if I can translate my data into something I can feed into that. And so for the last 3.5 years, we've been maintaining the service catalog within Datadog. And so anybody, anytime, anywhere in the world can go look and say, I have a problem. It relates to this service. This service is owned by a given team. And we also include documentation in there. So if you want to go look at the source code, you can go do that. If you want to go figure out how we deploy things, we link to that. And so there's a lot of information that people can figure out before they have to pester anybody. But if they do need to pester somebody, we let them know who's on call. We give them a link to the Slack room for the team so that they can go ask a question in there. The Slack is typically the way people try to communicate, asynchronously, since we are spread out all over the world. And so that will usually the first best avenue. But if something's urgent, then yeah, you definitely want to find the on-call person and say, hey, you might want to look at this because it looks bad. And so
So,
the service catalog helps break down the silos for the occasions when the silos need to be broken down.
okay, yeah, that's a lot to manage. So you spent a lot of time evaluating serious tooling decisions, which is where leadership judgment really starts to show, in my perspective at least. When teams are evaluating incident management and observability platforms, what do leaders most often get wrong?
That's a challenging question. I like that. I think the biggest thing folks get wrong in evaluating tools is uh, thinking that anyone is good as another. It ends up being a lot of diversity in the tools and how they work and how well they're going to fit into your organization. And the healthy organizations that I've worked in will try it out for a little while and see how it works in practice. People will promise you a lot of things that don't actually work. So you can't read the brochure to figure that out. You've got to implement it and see how it's going to work with your stuff in practice. And that's what I've been doing for decades. And I still working with vendors last year was like, man, I thought stuff was going to work and it really didn't. So we're just going to have to go try something else. And so there's no amount of experience that I know of that can get you to look at these things and make a guess right off the bat. You need to try it out and really go into it with what your key characteristics are. So, we talked about Slack a minute ago, making sure that the way that the thing operates from the Slack perspective is really important because most of the developers, that's the first way that they're going to try and approach any tool because they're already using Slack. It's a very comfortable place for them to start from. And so if they can do everything they want with your platform through Slack and not have to go to your website at all, that's a perfect product in my world, from that perspective. And so that takes care of a lot of the user experience aspect of things if it works well with Slack.
I guess that brings up another question for me, at least. What happens when you sign up with a vendor and you do the implementation, but it doesn't work? Is there like a clawback clause in the contract that, hey, come get your software back? Is it on a trial? Because you've already taken delivery of the product. So how do you work that out?
Typically, most vendors will give you like a 30 to 90-day trial period. And
Okay.
if you can make the decision within that trial time, then it's all free. Part of they're burning their compute dollars and AWS cloud expenses and stuff on their sales side, and that's part of their cost of doing business. Sign the contract. Typically, we do annual contracts for the vast majority of our vendor relationships. And so that means on an annual basis, you get the opportunity to decide whether you're going to continue with that vendor or not. But for particularly something like an observability platform, you expect that you're going to need to be paying two people for the same thing for at least 6 months because it's going to take a while to
Okay.
be able to get everybody onto the new platform and to accept that you can unplug the old platform. We're working with one of the AI SRE tools last year, and so that presents a little bit simpler story. So we tried it out. We liked some aspects of it. We tried to roll it out to the broader organization, and it didn't work out when we were trying to do that. And we were working on seeing if we could pivot and relaunch it and be more successful within the tool. But we got to the end of that first year contract. And so management was like, no, we don't want to keep putting time. We don't want to put another year into seeing if we're going to be able to make this thing work. And so they pulled the plug, and we decided that we were just going to do something different. And we don't know what that's going to be yet precisely, but it wasn't going to be continuing to work with that vendor to try and make it work.
Okay. So 90-day trial, 30 to 90-day trials, and annual contracts for renewal.
But yeah, we're often paying for things that we do not utilize as well as we would like to.
Yeah, welcome. Man, that's every business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's sad, but I don't even get sad about it anymore. It's just, life.
Yeah. Now, one of my colleagues has a practice in his business where every 90 days or every quarter, they audit all the software tools that they're using to see who's actually using them. And he's able to find at least 2 tools every quarter that no one's used that entire 90-day period. And then he cancels the subscription, and he's saved an obscene amount of money since he put this into practice. And it's crazy to me. People sign up for a tool one time that one project manager may have needed, and they don't stop it, and it's just a recurring expense now. But they used it for the one thing they needed it for.
And particularly, when you get to a business that's hundreds of people, you
Mhm.
end up with a lot of those little things, and it's really easy for them to get lost. And, if it's not costing a few $100,000, the accountants aren't going to worry about it. So, but there's a lot of opportunity to be able to save some money on those things.
Yeah, yeah. That leads me to a broader question around operational maturity because tools only help when the surrounding culture is strong enough to use them well. What separates a team that merely installs tooling from a team that actually becomes effective because of it?
Uh,
And what does real operational maturity look like in motion from your perspective?
Okay. I think the answer to both questions ends up being very, very cultural. That, you have people that look at, you know, how many tickets somebody closed or how many commits were made. And these things have been recognized as not being effective measures of performance, but because they're such easy things for people to fall back on, they end up getting tied into performance processes and not really, people are optimizing for these metrics instead of thinking about whatever the bigger picture is. And so it takes a lot of discipline for the entire organization not to fall into a lot of these common traps. And I've seen, lots of big name companies fall into these things. Uber was all about, how many commits people were making on a daily basis,
Mm,
and that also was not a very healthy culture. And so if you're constantly sprinting and you think that just like go, 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 go is great, it has a nice vibe to it, but it doesn't give people a chance to breathe and reflect and really be able to look at the bigger picture. An example of something that they've stopped doing now, but I thought was really great back in the day was Google had 20% time. And so the 20% time was that every Friday, every engineer could work on whatever they wanted to work on. And what they found was that people built new products, people made processes more efficient, they built tools to make life easier for people. And you really need to give the people on the ground enough time to be able to do that sort of thing. And if you're always pushing them to deliver, 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 then they never get the chance to breathe and reflect and bring those sort of things in. And a lot of companies will try to do this sort of thing with hackathons as a way to be able to give people a break to do whatever that they want to do that's self-directed. But, one day a year is obviously not going to be as effective as one day a week,
okay.
and so but it all ties back to the culture. If you're just saying we're just moving as fast as we can and we expect everybody to sprint every week, then people are going to understand that that's what's expected of them and they're going to operate accordingly. And you're going to lose all of those opportunities for improved efficiency, potential new products, because the people at the top aren't the only ones that are having the good ideas. And, one of the things that I also think is a great idea that I've seen in some companies is deferring to the people on the ground. If you're 3 levels above somebody trying to make a decision about something, you probably shouldn't overrule the person that's actually, right there
Traces
dealing
with
with the
them,
thing
yeah.
because they've got a lot more information and a much better context. And everything that's getting up to the SVPs has been filtered through 3 people. And so you got a lot of different perspectives that get added onto it, and it doesn't necessarily reflect reality very well.
There's a game that we used to play as children. It's called Telephone.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, no. I play that game in corporate America every day.
It's like, this is nothing like the initial message I sent. Earlier, before we jumped on, we were talking about AI a bit. You've also helped teams adopt AI tools, right?
Yes.
Which is one of the biggest shifts? That's one of the biggest shifts happening in technical work right now across the board. Even in my work in finance, it's replacing a lot of tasks that I don't have to do any longer, which makes me very happy. Where have you seen AI tools like Cloud Code and similar systems genuinely improve engineering and infrastructure work?
That the people are able to build really nice code and ship it much faster, and that really reduces a lot of the toil in us being able to do the work. And so we can focus on the bigger picture, hopefully more of the time. And there's definitely a lot of challenges in being able to successfully use these tools, being able to make sure that you're getting the result you want. Their AI tools are very designed to act helpful and try to find ways to do what you're asking, but it can do it in some of the weirdest, strangest ways. It's like, oh, the way to solve this problem is for me to put your credentials in this file and commit it to the repo. It's like, okay, that's you know a way to get it done, but it's gonna you know really irritate your security people, and you're gonna have to go update all your passwords, because you've just shared this credential with the whole world. And
Yeah.
so the risks are heightened as well, and so people have to learn how to effectively use these things. And the procedural coding aspect is what people tend to think about, but we've been using these AI tools to write Terraform as well. And a lot of the work that we do is, okay, we have Terraform that does 90% of what we want it to do, but we want to add a few more features, and that means we need to restructure things. And so that restructuring work tends to be very focused, tedious sort of work to make sure that you've moved everything around, but it's still going to work at the end of the day. And the AI is great. You give it the parameters, and it goes off and does it, and you look at the result and you see how it goes. But I've ended up falling into several traps in my time in working with the AI that you have to understand what's possible. So I
Huh?
spent a couple of weeks recently trying to add a feature to one of my open source projects. I was like, why is the AI keep doing these stupid things? It's not doing what I'm asking it to do. It keeps falling back to this backwards thing. Why is it happening? And I tried different tools, and it was still ending up in the same mess. But I had to like go through like 5 different stabs at this thing before I realized that what I was asking was impossible. The API wasn't there to do
Yeah.
what I wanted to do, and so there was no way that any of these tools were gonna be able to build it for me. And so
So it just wasn't feasible. Okay.
and I had a similar thing like 6 months ago where I was going down one path and built a lot of Terraform, and I was really happy with how things were going, and it was looking right to me. It was feeling like we were getting close to where we wanted to go, but then I just ended up with some edge cases that I wasn't really happy with. I was able to successfully build what I asked it to build, but I was asking it to build the wrong thing. If I had asked it to use a different part of the platform, then it would have been using an API that was much simpler. We would have been able to get all the way through the process. I wouldn't have had the edge case problems I had. And so, in one sense, you can say, oh, it's too bad the AI lets you get so far going down the wrong path, but it was also educational. It's like going down what I thought was the right path and turned out to be the wrong path.
Mhm.
we're 95% of the way, but like that last 5%, oh, I need to start over and go down some other direction. And so it was relatively easy to pivot at the end and say, oh, let me go try this. Oh, wow, that went much faster. And so working with the AI can help educate us on what is possible and what the underlying tools are. And so using that exploratory stuff to be able to learn what's going on helps you figure out where you want to go from there.
Okay. Where do you think the industry is still overestimating what AI can responsibly do today?
People are shipping products and never reading the code, never understanding what's going on. And I think that, maybe if you're doing app development or something like that's okay. But when you're working with these systems that need to work with other people and other systems, then you really want to take a little more care about it. And so the interfaces between things, the APIs between things end up becoming critical and defining what those demarcations are. Where do we want this thing to stop and this thing to begin? The AI can help you figure that out, but ultimately, humans have to decide whether that's an acceptable answer or not. And then once you've set up those guardrails, then it's relatively easy for people to go off in their silos, as we were talking about earlier, and focus
Yeah.
on their aspect of things and be able to execute successfully.
It sounds like this is where 20% time could be more helpful.
I would love to see that, man. If anybody wants to bring 20% time back, hire me. I'll come bring it to your organization.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was that you have an open source project. And when I was doing some research about you before our call, that's something that stood out to me about your background. How has collaborating to open source shaped the way you think about engineering quality, collaboration, and credibility overall?
Absolutely. Firstly, almost everything we're building these days is based on Linux and Golang and all of these open source languages and tools. And so I've always felt like giving back was an important part of my responsibility. But it's been challenging, figuring out how a given project operates and how you can fit in and that sort of thing is a difficult thing. And I really feel like anybody that can get a contribution accepted into an open source project is operating at a higher level than we can typically operate in a company. I can usually go find my friends at the company and say, will you approve my change? And they'll say yes. And, and I can go on with life. With an open source organization, you don't have somebody you can walk down the hall and say, please, let my change through so that I can, say that I'm done. They have whatever their expectations are. And most open source projects will have some contributing guidelines, a guideline for what a pull request should look like so that people can read up and figure that out. But you've got to try it. You've got to see how far you get and see what sort of reaction you get. The whole AI evolution has really made the whole open source world a little bit weirder. We've seen some projects that have shut down any input whatsoever, that they don't want to accept anything because the noise and the garbage was just becoming way too frustrating. And so it was easier to say that we're only going to accept contributions from people we already know and stop accepting random drive-by sort of contributions. And I'm lucky that none of my projects are nearly that popular that I'm not attracting that sort of thing. But, I have been concerned that I might need to, change some of my policies and attitudes. But I have, in the last few years gotten some things up there that were interesting to people. And so having the feedback from other people that are actually using stuff I'm building is really nice. And it is, I think, an opportunity that a lot of people should take up. I work with tons of people that do great work, but nearly all of them are afraid to put anything publicly on their GitHub. And one of the selling points I think is this is your professional portfolio. You're putting out there things that show what you're capable of, but people are going to find the bugs and whatever else. It's like no. I'm impressed that people put something up and they're maintaining it, and if, they're willing to share it with other people and see if it works for anybody other than them. And, but people try to perfect things before they do that. And so there's a lot of stuff that just never makes it out to see the light of day. But yeah, I definitely think that that's a good way for people to work on their skills and be able to show off their skills to potential employers.
It totally makes sense. There's a book by Guy Kiyosaki called Enchanted. I don't know how familiar you are with Guy, but he was the Apple evangelist under Steve back in the day. And his saying is, great entrepreneurs ship. Even if it's a crappy version one, you ship it. let the people use it. Let people tell you what's wrong with it. The market will give you the feedback you need to make it a usable product.
Yes, absolutely. To whatever degree you can use your own product. I've been working on using the AI to catch up a number of the projects that I wanted to get completed up on GitHub, but the stuff that I've put most of my time and effort into is the stuff that I'm using on a daily basis. I see where the problems are, and then I come back the next day and I try and make it a little bit better. And each day is not making some huge massive change, but all of these little incremental changes, and you end up with something that's nice and polished, and I'm happy to keep using it.
That's cool. Since you've been on both sides of the fence, do you feel like there are things that you learn from open source that you may never fully learn inside a closed corporate environment?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that um, open source projects, you tend to have a more diverse group of people that you're working with. Maybe internationally speaking different languages, coming from different perspectives. In the corporate world, you have a certain amount of homogeneity. In what people's backgrounds are. People aren't getting these sort of jobs if they don't have experience at similar sorts of jobs. But there's people out there that are doing stuff all the time that or maybe they're farmers or God knows what, but they, learned programming in college. And so then they wanted to go do something else. And so, I think it's great to be able to interact with people and learn things that I would have never learned just from my coworkers.
Well, that's so you kind of get a global perspective, and different backgrounds, different cultures definitely bring a different way of solving problems. I think this is where high performance really gets exposed because pressure tends to reveal the real quality of a team, whether it's corporate or open source. What separates an average infrastructure or CRE team from a top bracket team when pressure is high and the stakes are real? What do you think the best teams do differently before, during, or after a critical incident?
Staying calm and being organized. Production incidents when they're serious things, you need to bring in people from different teams. PagerDuty has a great website describing how to set up the roles for this sort of thing. You want to have an incident commander to keep the overall picture. You want to have people responding to various aspects of the technical problem, and you also want somebody focused on the communication. You want to be able to make sure you're giving status updates to leadership on a timely basis, so people aren't wondering whether something is actually being worked on or not. But really, being able to stay calm and focused on the problem, is the key differentiator. Allowing people to do that is something that comes, from culture and the leadership and the way that things are done. If you treat production incidents as something where somebody's going to get in trouble, if somebody's worried about getting fired for releasing bad software, that's not a very healthy environment for people to be able to stay calm and just be focused on the problem. And we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to release something to production that bombs. That's none of us are perfect enough not to do that. But can you get into the weeds and not freak out, and that will mean you can solve the problem faster, and then think about how to avoid letting that problem happen again without anybody feeling like they're being picked on.
Interesting. The human side of this is what makes it interesting for me.
We have this thing that sounds really serious for production incidents. The post-mortem is what we do after the incident. And
Mm.
so this is a document that lays the timeline out. What happened when did we discover it? When did people start working on it? What changes did we make? We saw them working X minutes later. And so you have this timeline, and it tells you, okay, these were the causes, these were the results, these were the people involved in making it happen. But the final part of all of these postmortems is an action plan for the future. We want to create these alerts. We want to add things to our CIC pipelines. We want to make sure we're developing software in languages that don't cause us memory corruption problems. All of those sort of things are things that we identify from having a real problem, and then those become tickets that get prioritized from there so that you can work on those things as part of your normal work cycle.
You said something that caught my ear, and I'm trying to remember what it was. It's called it a CRI pipeline?
CI/CD.
CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah. Sorry for using an acronym without defining it. Bad technical person habit there. I tried not to do that. CI is continuous integration and CD is continuous delivery.
Okay.
So continuous integration means that every time somebody adds new source code to the repository, you have automation that's running in the background that's automatically going to build a new artifact for whatever that project is. And so that's what continuous integration does. And that means that if you put in changes and your code can't compile anymore, your CI is going to fail. And so you're going to say, okay, that's not a change that we actually want to stick with. We want to back that out and try something different so that we're not blowing ourselves up. Once you have those artifacts from your continuous integration process, you feed them into the continuous delivery process. And this works differently for different types of things, but one way to do it is what we call a blue-green sort of deployment, where we're serving production from the blue servers right now. So we're going to go upgrade and replace what's on the green servers. And then we're going to move production over to the green servers. And if that works, okay, now the blue servers are the ones that we can replace. But if that doesn't work, then we always can fall back to the ones that were working and go like that. Another really common continuous delivery sort of scenario is, let's start the new thing with like 1% of traffic. And if it can handle 1% of traffic, then we'll take it to 10% of traffic and 50% of traffic and 75% and 100%. And each time we're able to gather more observability data to make sure that everything is operating as well or better than it did before, so that that can operate. And you can build your continuous delivery system so that it's looking at the metrics for you so that you're not even having to do that. And it won't, if the metrics look bad, it's like, okay, I'm stopping at 1% because this doesn't look good. You really
Yeah.
want to reconsider this thing. And so, um, I talked about Meta, having this sort of process earlier. This has become a very common thing, where, people that are writing the code aren't manually clicking through things to say that it's okay. Once the source code's in there, the background processes are going to take it through all of these stages, and there's usually testing and various other things to go in there as well as you learn through time, so that you are confident that your CI/CD isn't going to actually break something.
I see. Okay. I had another question. What was it? It was about AI agents. What is your take on AI agents right now? And I'm still grasping it myself. I have a friend who built an agent, or his friend taught him how to build an agent, right? And he had the agent go through a bunch of online courses that he bought, and then implement built tools to then sell to people based on what the agent learned in those courses, which I thought was pretty cool. But I don't understand how does it do that? I think he did it on OpenClaw, if I'm not mistaken.
OpenClaw is taking this stuff in an interesting direction. It really is creating a feedback loop that is basically talking to itself. So you're not in the gut, you're not in the weeds with this thing at all. You're treating it as a very high level sort of thing. And so the human's responsibility is sort of to set the direction and then just let the rest of the stuff take care of it. But, you know, asking about agents is you've got to think about the context, because agent means different things to a lot of different people. Like, Claude Code and Open Code and Cursor, those are coding agents, and they perform a certain, function that we're really happy with. But then you also see people using agents in this context where you're basically creating a character that exists within your thing. And so your character, we're now calling an agent, but for that agent to operate, it's actually calling these other coding agents underneath to be able to do the work. And so
Kind of like the orchestrator.
yeah, that's very much what OpenClaw does. And you know you have typically you've got like a CEO type character, an overseer type character that's running things. You'll have, worker type characters that are going and doing individual tasks, but then you'll end up with, like a verification sort of thing, something that's going to go look and make sure that things aren't getting off the rails, and people that more function as like a chief operating officer to coordinate between things and make sure that things aren't stepping on each other and that sort of thing. And so it really has become very sci-fi, where each of these tools defines its own set of characters, and people come up with their own names for these things, and it means something in that context. But then over here you have a different set of characters with different names doing different things. So it's sort of wild.
That is pretty wild. Is that what that whole what is it was like a social network that open block, or it was a social network for AI agents that everybody's like talking about.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head either, but yes, exactly. You know, you had these things like OpenClaw that were, you
Mont
know,
block is what it's called. I think.
then operating on it. It's amazing how easily it is to get these things to operate philosophically and start, talking about quasi religious sorts of things. Tropic had a vending machine, and so they were letting the AI drive this vending machine, and this is a project that evolved over a few years and was super interesting. They wrote a bunch of articles about it, but one of the problems they found was that um, they looked at what it was doing, and basically, you know, two of the agents that were operating within this vending machine basically sat there the entire night, talking about the existence of God and philosophy and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, that's super interesting. I don't see how that helps us be a better vending machine, but but that's driven a few people nuts too, that they think that they've discovered God inside the AI, and once you believe that, it seems hard to unbelieve that, and so
Yeah.
some people have lost their jobs, because it's like, no, that's not what's really in there yet.
Wow, that's insane in multiple ways. Multiple ways.
I told my therapist the other day that AI is going to keep her and her friends very busy for a long time.
No, sounds like it. That so people are believing that the AI is answering their religious calling.
Yes, that they usually ends up being a little more drawn out. Like, you have this stage where people are conversing with the AI and realizing it's artificial, but they have a conversation that they feel unlocks this, this
Mhm.
godlike aspect of the AI, and from there, that they've drank the Kool-Aid, and there's no undrinking it.
It's kind of like, have you ever seen the movie Her that came out in like 2013 when a guy falls in love with his AI girlfriend on his phone?
Yes.
It sounds similar to that. The future's 2030, 2035 is going to be a very interesting place to live, to be time to be alive.
It's amazing how much sci-fi has become real in my lifetime.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool too, in both good and bad ways, I guess. A big part of what we do explore on the podcast is a shift from earned income to ownership and equity. Your background makes that a very interesting bridge. Have you ever bought a business, invested in one, or considered ownership for yourself?
Yeah, yeah. For the first 20 years of my career, I was independent consultant on the East Coast, and I still am taking care of some of the customers from that business, and so that's what I have done for equity. But we have looked at doing other things, buying a trailer park or an apartment building, and or an ice cream stand, and that sort of thing. And we haven't followed through on that, but yeah, that's definitely something that we're interested in doing at some point in our lives.
Okay, and who's we, if you don't mind me asking?
And my wife and I.
Okay,
She,
cool.
she's a life coach. She used to be an office manager for various lawyers, so she's got a lot of interesting experience. But she came from a wealthy family, so she was used to growing up with people buying and selling businesses, and she, advised them on, technical aspects for what she knew from being involved. And so yeah, that's definitely something we're interested in getting back to.
Okay. And if you were to buy a business tomorrow, what type of business would interest you the most, and why do you think it would? I know you mentioned kind of real estate deals earlier. I specialize in buying and selling companies. That's why I'm asking this question.
You know, I like the idea of real estate, from a couple different perspectives. I think that the tax aspects of what folks can do with real estate is pretty unique, and that there's a lot of advantages to that form of business versus tech businesses and other type things, which I have more experience with. And honestly, like if I had an apartment building, I would love to be spending my weekends fixing it up and improving it. I lived in an apartment in LA for a few years and got to know the family that was behind it. And the dad had been in construction and the son had been a tech person, and he wanted to keep his dad busy in retirement. So every time his dad got finished remodeling one apartment building, he'd go and buy another one so that he would have the next one to keep him busy. And so this was what kept the entire family happy. And I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. I don't know that I want to go that far with it, but I love that idea. And I grew up with my dad as a civil engineer, and we were remodeling this turn of the century schoolhouse. And so, that was really fun for me. And I've helped out with Habitat for Humanity things to be able to, keep my building active, but, actually having my own larger thing to work on, I think would be great fun.
That does sound like a lot of fun. I've never ever in my life spoken to someone who wants to own a piece of real estate to work on it. Most people are actively avoiding that like the plague.
You know, I definitely would want to evolve it so that I had another handyman that was doing the day-to-day work. But yeah, starting off, I would totally want to get in there and see what was going on myself before I handed it off to somebody else.
I have this actually comes to mind. One of my mentors and now colleagues is a real estate broker here in the Bay Area. He has a property available in Oakland on Lakeshore. And the terms of the deal are pretty favorable. The owner's pretty motivated to get out of it. If you want, I have your email. I can forward you the.
Yeah, I would love to see it. I don't think we're going to make any major moves this year, but yeah, we would love to keep an eye on what's available.
Okay.
And
I'll send that over.
what you have for learning about these things, I'd love to know.
Learning about real estate?
Yeah, well, like when the deals are coming through, like that sort of deal.
Oh, I mean, I hit my inbox all the time.
Nice.
Yeah, I can forward them to you. I'll also send you my book. I don't know if I told you that I'm an author as well. So
I saw that you were an author, but I didn't buy your book yet. So if I get one for free, that's even better.
yeah, I'll send you the link to it. It is on Amazon. Actually, you're local, so we can meet up for coffee or something. I just bring you one.
That'd be great. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can. We love driving around, so I'm happy to come up to Marin sometime.
Okay. Sweet. Do you have any closing questions for me or anything you want to tell the audience?
This was really fun. Thank you for taking the time. I really enjoyed your questions, and I'm so glad that we got to do this.
Likewise, man. I learned a lot, and I have a different perspective of AI agents now. I now realize that is a very large umbrella term, and I need to be more specific when I ask about them.
There's a web page that I've been using for the last couple of years called roadmap. Gives you a sequence of steps to go through to learn a programming language, but they also have a number of roadmaps that are related to different aspects of AI, vibe coding and building agents and building the models and all that sort of thing. And so like if there's any topic that roadmap has that you're interested in, it's pretty lightweight to be able to click through it and follow the sequence and build up your knowledge about whatever new thing you want to learn about.
Okay, I'll check it out. Roadmap.sh. Where is?
So I don't remember which country SH is, but the reason that it's significant for geeks is because SH is the original shell. So Unix was developed in 1970s at Bell Labs, and so the shell was the command line that you interacted with. And so when you open up a terminal window in Mac OS or Windows or whatever, you're interacting with the shell that ultimately came from that, but SH was the original shell for everybody.
Gotcha. Okay, so it has that nostalgia, like, oh, that's where it all started.
But yeah, I'll have to look up what SH's country code is, because yeah, it really is a country code.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Top Bracket Podcast, where top performers share their playbook. Subscribe so you never miss the next episode.